It moved through the camera into her eyes and then into her head. Over the past 7 to 8 months, some very weird things have been happening during my spirit guide readings. Now, I'd like to talk about the weirdest of experiences because I am on a little bit of a clock. My camera will shut down at some point because it's gone into the habit of overheating. Alright, so what happened first? So I'm sat at my desk on a video call, and as I'm looking at the client, I close my eyes and I open myself up to channeling anything that's nearby, hoping to snag a spirit guide. On my right hand side, I notice a consciousness, an intelligence enter into the room. And as it does, it decides to shoot down into my head, down into the midsection of my back, and then spread out into my body, propping my head up for me and then turning my head to the right hand side, right next to me. And then all of a sudden, it speaks through my mouth, saying, "I'm standing right here." Now, at this moment of time, it has my eyes peeled wide open. It's trying to get me to see it standing there, although I can't quite see it fully. I see that the space near me has been bent. It's kind of warped, in a sense. And then straight away, it goes from being there to being outside the window. Now, for you to further understand as to how this situation went about, you need to understand the layout of the environment that I'm in. See, I've told you that my computer was in front of me. I may have even mentioned as to how there was a window behind that computer. Well, at the time, we were staying within a block of flats, and these block of flats sank down into the ground quite some bit. And so when I would look outside the window, I would see this embankment of grass, this kind of hillside leading up to the road. And then on the road, there would be a walkway with handrails leading into the block of flats. And now that's out of the way. Going back to the story, she was there for a second, right next to me. And then all of a sudden, she was next to the handrail, next to the walkway leading into the block of flats. And as she's standing there, I feel 3 more presences, 3 more consciousnesses, beings, next to where she's standing. And they seem to be standing right next to each other. Each one of them pulled, because on that day it was a snow day, the snow from the ground and materialized little tornadoes, about 5 feet in height, each of them the same width in diameter. Okay, so you've got 3 beings materialized as tornadoes next to this original spirit guide that's standing next to the handrail. I'm sat there in the chair looking at all of this outside of the window, and I'm explaining it to the client the best I can. I'm quite baffled at this moment in time. I pull myself together and I continue to channel the spirit guide on this woman's behalf. There was this one experience that I remember quite vividly simply because of how it went. Essentially, before she even told me her situation, this entity was able to feed me information about what it was that she was going through. As I'm sat there and she's talking about her dilemma, sure enough, everything that she says, I already knew because of this one particular consciousness, again coming in through the right-hand side of my head where most spirit guides channel into. And as she's talking about as to how she doesn't want to be alone for the rest of her life, and certain experiences leading up to that session had indicated that fact. I don't want to give away her name or too much information, so I think that should be just enough. I start to see glimpses of what it is that's listening. In a moment, I get a flash of white fur that gives way to a blue feather. And then I start to see an outline of a head shaped very much like a pineapple, because more feathers are up here. And then as I work my way down the image of what I'm seeing, I see black eyes about the size of a very large marble. And then I saw something that made sense out of all of this imagery, which was its mouth. Now, it didn't have a mouth like you or I. It had a beak, which made sense when it came to what this particular being was. You see, this particular being was a blue avian, one of the most intellectually advanced beings out there in the universe. You can channel these beings, as well as apparently meet them in person. I told the client as to what it was this being was, and she didn't know. She'd never come across a blue avian before. within her community, her spiritual community, as well as on the internet, which I thought was like, what? And so I'm looking through Google Images in order to pull up a photo to show her. As I'm looking through these giant bird examples, the blue avian in me is saying, yes, that's us. And I think to myself, us. I thought it was just one being here. I let out a massive yawn, and with it, this blue avian, he leaves my mouth and just disappears into the ceiling. Whilst the client is talking, I have to stop her. I tell her, wait a second, it's no longer with us, and I have no clue if it's going to come back. And as we continue to talk about her relationships, I find that this being does come back, in fact. And when it comes into my body, he says, okay, I'm ready. I go, ready for what? Because I'm going to make the changes so that she can have the life that she wants. I'm going to make sure that her relationships last. As it's saying this, I notice that I can sense other blue avians up in the sky. I just call that space the central hub, a mothership of sorts. And when I yawned, he had left my body to go up there and to speak to them about her situation. I could feel that they were doing something in order to influence her life, although the blue avian in my body told me that I wasn't allowed to know, and neither was her. But what she was allowed to know, as well as I, was what it was about to do next. You see, once it came back from its central hub, it moved through the camera into her eyes and then into her head, and then proceeded to make changes to her subconscious mind. It changed how she was going to behave in the future, simply by making her a little bit more lenient, a little bit more forgiving, a little bit more relaxed as a person. These areas were crucial for her long-term stability within her relationships. She needed to be able to let things go. And then once it felt like it was done, it left. Whilst it was doing this, I could feel its blue avian buddies working in tandem with it as they were working on her mind. Now, mind you, this was something that she had asked for during the session. There was this point where we had pulled out tarot cards and everything was leading to her being alone for the rest of her life. And so she asked if there was anything that could be done to change her situation. After asking the blue avian a number of times, he finally came around, although he did not say yes. That's when he just left my mouth. Now, during these reading sessions, beings often come and go as they please. So I just took it as, is he coming back? I don't know. There was this one instance whereby which a lady had booked a session, and I kept feeling like someone was standing behind her to the left-hand side, her right, in the corner of her living room. And as I'm constantly pulled there, time and time again, I start to make out what it is that's standing there. In my mind's eye, I start to see a woman, and I can see her so clearly that I could describe her to the client. Not only did I give a full description, but I also gave a name. As it turns out, an extended member of her family had passed away. And it just so happened to be the same ghost that's standing in the back of her room. That creeped her out a little bit, and I must admit I was a little bit on edge too, because it just remained there throughout the entire session. She was a little disappointed because she didn't want to have any communication with this spirit. Matter of fact, she had booked the session in the hopes of reaching out not only her spirit guides, but also her father. Now, ghosts can be very difficult to get a hold of, because whenever I open myself up to the spirit world, I often feel a room full of random dead people. For this reason, I just try to channel spirit guides. It's much easier. Oh, yeah. At one point, an entity actually put its hand through the webcam and touched the client. He was able to feel his individual fingers on his chest. Freaked him out. That was when I learned that beings don't necessarily need your permission to get through to the other side of the camera. Now, most people welcome that. They want to be able to communicate more with their spirit guides, and so they don't mind so much. He didn't mind neither. But, it's hard not to be weirded out at first glance, Are you hearing someone knocking behind you or pacing back and forth behind you? That was another thing that happened. At one point, different client, We were both on a psychedelic, and he was able to literally hear and feel someone pacing back and forth behind him. Then all of a sudden, it was like he walked off screen and ended up in my movie, in my room. It seemed that distance didn't matter at all, as this being was able to traverse time and space within an instant. And on a couple of occasions, spirit guides were actually guides of other family members first. For example, they were the client's dad's spirit guides before they became the client's spirit guides. We tend to look at spirit guides as more of an individual thing. We have spirit guides, my spirit guide, but sometimes it is a case of our spirit guides or our team when it comes to how focused they are in a particular person's life. One instance jumps out at me. There was this one experience whereby which a spirit guide was telling the client to put back on their altar something that they had taken off months before. The client kept saying, was it this piece of moldavite crystal that I had taken off my altar? The guide had said no. And then he kept showing me this image of something that you put around your neck. And then on it, a pendant. Of course, it was a necklace, a very particular necklace. And as I was explaining it to the client, he was like, oh yeah, I had taken that off my altar a couple of months ago. And then he showed it to me and put it back on his altar. The reason as to why I had to be on the altar was because it was opening a gate to the Fey dimension, which was where this specific spirit guide hailed from. After doing enough of these readings, I came to realize that a decent amount of spirit guides that could pop into this reality and check up on you, just pay attention to your life, do come from the Fey realm. Now, not all Fays have wings. Not all of them look like little women that are flying around. Most of the time they look like deformed people. Sometimes a little too short, sometimes their nose is a little too big. Gnome-like. And then you can get some very animalistic beings coming from that plane of existence, guiding you, or rather keeping tabs on you before they then pass on those tabs to the higher-ups, or spirit guides that can actually manipulate reality for you. On the topic of animal spirit guides, the first time one showed up within a session, it completely took me back. The amount of power this thing had behind it, it was like it was within a class of its own. It was so majestic. I mean, heck, it was a blue kite. It had its wings going like this and it was just looking at me whilst its head stayed still. Very much like a hummingbird in that it had that dexterity. However, it was just much bigger. It had that presence of a kite. Now, a kite is kind of like an eagle, but its wingspan is a little different, especially how they're shaped, as well as its tail, which gives it its kite-like appearance. Once that spirit animal came through, it kind of opened the gate to other types of creatures that resembled animals, such as lion beings, one of which shut me up completely because he didn't want me to divulge specific information to the client. He just removed my ability to be able to speak. He was very, cautious as to how much information I was privy to, as well as how much information I gave out to the client. Turns out that client was a Leo, And on another occasion, the same thing happened. Another lion being came through for a Leo client. And so there are some connections that take place that make all of this all the more real, especially when it comes to reptilian beings being channeled. And when I say reptilian beings, I'm not talking about the dragons like the draconians. I'm talking about anything that resembles a reptile. In this particular experience, it was a snake. It came through in my head and looked at me as if it was at the forefront of my third eye. It looked at me up and down and appeared as if it was debating as to whether or not I was allowed passage to this person's ancestors, their mind, their life, their guides. And at the same time, she actually saw the snake eye also on her end of the camera. That's just another example as to how space and time doesn't matter during these readings. They're able to check up on me as well as take a look at her. And so that's going to be about all that we have time for today. Thank you to those subscribers that suggested this video. And if you would like to know as to how I attained this ability, then check out this video here, and I'll speak to you all pretty soon. Take care. Peace.